The vast hall of the interplanetary peace assembly shimmered under a frigid, surgical illumination. Across the expansive table, delegates from the Earth's unified coalition and the enigmatic Kth Dominion were seated. Their expressions were carefully sculpted masks of diplomatic neutrality, yet they failed to fully hide the deep-seated suspicion that had festered for centuries. Resting between the two delegations was the fate of two distinct species, one human, one vampiric, both caught within a delicate ceasefire that neither side truly trusted. From the high-up observation gallery, Ethan Hale watched the proceeding with hands tightly clasped behind his back. His role as Earth's leading expert in xenogenetics had secured him this unwanted prime seat for a historic moment. At 34, he had devoted his professional life to comprehending non-human biology, driven by the conviction that knowledge could bridge the gaps between worlds. Now, he witnessed that very knowledge being twisted into a perverse act that churned his stomach. Dr. Hale. General Consincade's voice sliced through the silence of his thoughts. The official transfer ceremony will commence in 10 minutes. Your presence is mandatory. Ethan pivoted, meeting the general's steely gaze with unconcealed disdain. So, we are truly proceeding with this barbarism? Handing over a sentient being as if she were merely a laboratory specimen? Consincade's face grew stern. That sentient being is a Kth female who has willingly offered herself to participate in our critical research program. The alternative is total war, Doctor. Their populace is on the brink of collapse. They are desperate. This arrangement serves the mutual benefit of all parties. Everyone except for her, Ethan muttered under his breath, yet he followed the general toward the designated ceremonial chamber. The Kth, or Kth, were a spacefaring race of vampires who had achieved interstellar travel long before humanity had even mastered the use of fire. Once the undisputed sovereigns of a dozen star systems, they now faced imminent extinction. Millennia ago, their forebears had engineered their own genetics to regulate population growth and consolidate authority among the noble classes. This specific modification had tragically devolved into a curse: total reproductive sterility. For ages, they had sustained themselves through synthesized blood and advanced cloning techniques, but genetic deterioration was rapidly escalating. Their numbers dwindled with every passing decade. The ceremony space was small, yet possessed a formidable presence. In its center, on a raised dais, Ambassador Varric of the Kth Dominion stood, flanked by guards whose pale sapphire skin seemed to emit a soft radiance under the overhead lights. Beside Varric stood a Kth female, her face partially obscured by a traditional veil, a symbol of high-status submission. As he approached, Ethan felt a painful clench in his chest. This felt less like science and more like a sacrifice. Dr. Ethan Hale, the human diplomat announced clearly, our foremost authority in interspecies genetics. He will supervise the compatibility trials with complete respect for Kth custom and dignity. Ambassador Varric offered a slight tilt of his head. We present Lyra Vera, of the House of the Seventh Moon. She has been certified as appropriate for your experimental procedures. The profound silence that followed was telling. In Kth society, a female confirmed to be infertile held absolutely no social currency. This was more than a mere political trade, it was an act of exile. Varric continued, his voice as frigid as splintered ice. She carries the genetic identifiers most likely to respond favorably to human biological catalysts. Her fertility quotient is 0, which validates her status as a suitable test subject, eliminating the risk of unforeseen complications. The veiled figure remained utterly still throughout this cold, clinical evaluation of her worth. Once the formal proceedings concluded, Ethan found himself alone with Lyra inside a transit shuttle en route to the secretive research facility. Protocol strictly forbade conversation until their arrival at the secure compound, but the silence between them was oppressively heavy, surpassing the force of gravity. Finally, in the privacy of the laboratory suite, which would serve as their residence for the immediate future, Lyra slowly lifted her veil. Ethan drew a sharp breath. Her face was distinctly alien and sharp, high, prominent cheekbones, elongated canines barely visible beneath her light lips, and skin with a bluish undertone that appeared to subtly shimmer. Yet, her eyes were extraordinarily expressive, deep pools of violet that burned with keen intelligence and barely constrained fury. Dr. Hale, she stated, her voice unexpectedly melodic despite its cool, detached quality. I have my directives to adhere to your experimental protocols. Let us forego the pleasantries. What is your initial requirement? Blood samples, genetic material, or shall we commence immediately with reproductive attempts? The utter lack of emotion in her clinical assessment unnerved Ethan. Actually, he said, taking a deliberate step back to grant her distance, I thought we might begin with a cup of coffee or whatever the Kth equivalent is. A flash of bewilderment crossed her features. I do not understand. Look, Ethan said, running a hand through his dark hair. I know neither of us desire to be here. But I want you to understand one thing. In the confines of this lab you are not a specimen. You are my colleague. Whatever the people outside are anticipating, in here we work together or we don't work at all. Her expression did not waver, but something subtle in her posture seemed to relax. An interesting strategy, Dr. Hale. I was led to believe that humans regarded the Kth as nothing more than parasites at best, and research fodder at worst. Then you were wrongly informed, Ethan countered, moving to the food synthesizer. And please call me Ethan. Dr. Hale makes me feel like my elderly father. He programmed the device to synthesize the Kth equivalent of tea, a dark crimson liquid that carried a faint scent of copper and cinnamon. As he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed momentarily, and she visibly recoiled from the contact. Thank you, Ethan, she said stiffly. It was a small, negligible instance set against the monumental backdrop of interspecies politics. Yet, as Lyra took her first sip, observing him over the cup's rim with weary eyes, a subtle change occurred in the atmosphere between them, a variable that neither the Kth Dominion nor the human coalition had accounted for in their meticulous planning. The initial weeks unfolded in a pattern of intense, structured cooperation. Each morning started with medical scans and blood work, followed by lengthy hours of detailed genetic analysis. Ethan worked with meticulous care, fully explaining every test and respectfully maintaining Lyra's personal boundaries. Lyra, for her part, remained aloof but exceptionally observant, studying him with the same intensity he applied to her biology. Your reproductive system is strikingly comparable to that of human females, Ethan remarked one afternoon while reviewing her scans. The primary distinction lies in the cellular receptors. Kth ova possess a protein shell that actively prevents successful fertilization. A deliberate piece of engineering, Lyra replied, her tone rigidly neutral. When our ancestors implemented population control, they fashioned what they termed the immortal barrier. Only specifically designated noble houses retained the capacity to reproduce, and even then, only by utilizing a synthetic enzyme regimen. But something inevitably went awry? Ethan surmised. Lyra's lips tightened. Across generations, the enzyme treatment progressively lost its effectiveness. Eventually, even the noble lineages began to produce sterile offspring. The final naturally conceived Kth was born 312 Earth years ago. Ethan whistled softly. And synthetic reproduction? Cloning kept us viable for centuries, she explained, but each successive generation shows faster degradation. Our scientists project fewer than 4 generations remain before a complete cellular collapse. Her voice held steady, though Ethan noticed a slight tremble in her hands. Is that why you volunteered? He asked, his voice soft. Lyra's violet eyes flashed. I did not volunteer, doctor. I was designated because I am classified as genetically useless. My reproductive system is rated as entirely non-viable, making me the perfect candidate for experimental procedures that would be a waste of resources on females with even the slightest fertility potential. The bitterness in her statement hit Ethan with palpable force. I am truly sorry, he stated simply. She averted her gaze. Your sympathy changes absolutely nothing. Later that evening, Ethan woke to a subtle sound in the common area. He found Lyra standing by the viewport, gazing out at the distant stars. She was wearing a simple sleeping tunic, and in the ambient starlight she looked less alien and surprisingly more vulnerable. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. She didn't turn. Kth requires substantially less rest than humans. That wasn't what I asked. A lengthy pause followed. No, she finally admitted. I cannot sleep. Ethan moved to stand beside her, taking care to keep a respectable distance. Do you want to discuss it? What is there to discuss? I am here to serve a function. My personal comfort is utterly irrelevant. Not to me it isn't, Ethan stated firmly. She turned then, scrutinizing his face with those deeply penetrating violet eyes. You are unexpected, Ethan Hale. On my world, I was told that humans were savage, self-serving creatures who would exploit everything they needed from me without a moment's thought for my dignity. Some might, Ethan conceded. But I have no interest in using coercion. Genuine scientific breakthroughs aren't achieved through force. They spring from genuine understanding. And what deep understanding do you claim to possess regarding me? The question was delivered with a sharp edge of challenge. Ethan paused, then admitted, "Not enough. I know you are a Kth female from the 7th house. I am familiar with your biological makeup, but I still do not know who you are, Lyra Vera. I don't know what fills your dreams, what drives your deepest fears, or what small things you hope for." A subtle flicker, perhaps surprise, crossed her violet eyes. "Dreams and hopes are extravagant luxuries reserved for those who still have a future," she stated softly. Then unexpectedly she revealed, "Before my selection for this program, I was a member of the Imperial Guard. I was a soldier." Ethan's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Seriously? That detail was missing from your official dossier." A faint, spectral smile touched her lips. "The Dominion prefers to portray me as a submissive female, not a warrior. It simplifies their public narrative. Did you find fulfillment in being a warrior?" "Fulfillment." She seemed to weigh the word. "It gave me purpose. Since the possibility of forming a family or having children is close to us, Kth females must seek other avenues to serve the Empire. I demonstrated excellence in both combat and strategic planning." Ethan leaned back against the viewport. "So, how exactly did a high-ranking warrior end up here?" The brief moment of openness vanished from her expression. "My final medical assessment revealed that my reproductive system was completely non-functional. A dead womb is the crude human translation. Most Kth females retain some theoretical reproductive capability, even if it cannot be activated. I had none. This status rendered me expendable for any dangerous experimental procedures." The clinical, matter-of-fact way she described her own perceived worthlessness caused a sharp ache in Ethan's chest. "You are not expendable, Lyra. Not to me." She stared at him for a long moment before returning her gaze to the stars. "Your kindness is appreciated, Doctor, but it fundamentally alters nothing about our predicament." "Perhaps not," Ethan agreed. "But it might change how we confront it." They stood in companionable silence, watching the distant suns burn against the blackness, each lost in profound thoughts neither dared to articulate. The research station was in orbit around Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon, designated as neutral territory by interstellar treaty. Its remote location was intended to guarantee maximum security. However, 3 months into their assignment, that security was brutally shattered. The first sign was a sudden violent shudder that threw both Ethan and Lyra to the deck during a standard medical scan. "What in the hell?" Ethan scrambled to his feet as flashing red emergency lights bathed the laboratory in an alarming glow. The facility's AI voice boomed over the speakers. "Security breach detected in docking Bay 3. All personnel must initiate lockdown protocols." "This is not a drill." Ethan's console immediately flashed with an urgent message from Chief of Security Alvarez. "Dr. Hale, arm yourself and secure the specimen. Hostiles have boarded. Appears to be the Human Purity Front. They are actively targeting all non-human life forms." Lyra's face tightened at the dehumanizing term specimen, but she was already moving, quickly retrieving a small, sleek energy pistol concealed beneath her uniform. "You're armed?" Ethan asked, startled. "Always," she replied grimly. "Old habits die hard." Ethan yanked an emergency stun gun from the lab's secure locker. "We need to get to the escape pods immediately. This section is indefensible." They moved with urgent speed through corridors saturated in crimson emergency illumination. The unmistakable sounds of conflict echoed from nearby sections. The discharge of energy weapons, harshly shouted orders, and screams that were abruptly silenced. "The Human Purity Front," Lyra stated as they ran. "The extremists who believe all alien species must be exterminated." "Fanatics," Ethan confirmed darkly. "They are convinced that any cooperation with non-human life leads to genetic contamination." They rounded a corner and halted abruptly. 3 figures in black tactical gear blocked the route to the escape pods. Their uniforms bore the Purity Front's stark symbol, a closed fist crushing a strand of DNA. "There," one attacker yelled. "The vampire and her collaborator." Weapons were raised, but Lyra was lethally fast. She fired her pistol twice in rapid succession, dropping 2 assailants before they could even lock their aim. The third managed to get off a shot that whizzed past Ethan's ear, searing the wall behind him. Ethan's stun gun was hopelessly inadequate against their advanced body armor, but he fired anyway, forcing the remaining attacker to momentarily duck for cover. This bought them the precious seconds they needed to retreat into a side passage. "The primary route is sealed off," Ethan gasped. "We require another path to the pods." "Maintenance tunnels," Lyra suggested, her military training evident in her unervingly calm assessment. All deep space installations have them. They located an access panel and squeezed into the cramped service passageway beyond. The faint blue emergency lighting barely cut through the darkness as they crawled through the tight space. Why take this risk for me? Lyra asked unexpectedly. You could have easily surrendered me and claimed you were my captor, not my collaborator. Ethan shot her an incredulous look. Is that truly your assessment of me after 3 months? I believe the instinct for survival transcends species boundaries, she responded evenly. Well, my personal survival instinct includes a firm refusal to abandon people I care about to murderous fanatics, he retorted. She fell silent at his declaration, but in the dim light, Ethan perceived a subtle softening in her expression. They emerged near the secondary escape pod bay, only to be met by more attackers. In the ensuing firefight, Ethan took a grazing shot to his shoulder, sending him staggering against the bulkhead, his vision momentarily blurring with agony. What happened next was a blur of incredible speed. Lyra moved with inhuman swiftness, disarming one attacker, using him as a temporary shield against the others, and then eliminating the remaining threat with ruthless, tactical efficiency. When the fighting ceased, she returned immediately to Ethan's side, her face showing a genuine concern he had never witnessed before. You are wounded, she stated, gently examining his shoulder with fingers that belied her recent violence. It's nothing, he managed, though the burning pain indicated otherwise. It is decidedly not nothing, she contradicted. That weapon is engineered to inflict maximum tissue trauma on non-humans. On a human, it will cause significant anguish, but it is not immediately lethal. How wonderfully reassuring, Ethan grimaced. They finally reached an escape pod, sealing themselves inside just as the station continued to shudder under the relentless assault. As the pod ejected into space, Ethan's vision began to fail from the pain and blood loss. Stay conscious, Lyra commanded, ripping material to fashion an emergency bandage. I cannot pilot this human vessel unaided. Trying, Ethan mumbled weakly. My apologies for the accommodations. Not exactly the luxury tour of Europa I had promised. Despite the peril, Lyra's lips curved slightly. Your attempts at humor while actively bleeding are duly noted, Doctor. Ethan, he automatically corrected. If I'm going to bleed out, the least you can do is use my name. You will not bleed out, she stated with absolute finality. Then, after a perceptible moment of hesitation, she bit her own wrist. Kth's saliva contains powerful coagulants and healing accelerators. It will stabilize your wound until we can reach an aid station. Before Ethan could fully process the action, she pressed her bleeding wrist directly against his wound. The initial contact seared like fire, making him gasp, but this soon faded as a profound cooling numbness spread through his shoulder, dramatically easing the pain. That's not in any xenobiology textbook I've ever read, he managed to say. There are many facets of the Kth that humans remain ignorant of, she replied, maintaining firm pressure on his injury. Her face was closer to his than it had ever been, her intense violet eyes focused entirely on him. Thank you, he murmured softly, for saving my life. Something unreadable passed across her sharp features. You safeguarded me when you could have easily saved yourself. I merely returned the obligation. Yet they both knew it was significantly more than a simple obligation. Something fundamental had shifted between them in those intense moments of crisis, a mutual recognition that entirely transcended the boundaries of species and duty. The small escape pod drifted toward the emergency rendezvous point, carrying two beings who had been forced together by political machinations, but were now bound by an unanticipated, personal bond. Following the terrorist attack, they were immediately relocated to a higher security facility on Mars. The official report blamed an equipment malfunction, not a terrorist infiltration, but security protocols intensified greatly. Their work continued under even greater pressure from both governments, desperate for progress after the near disaster. But privately, in the quiet interludes between official experiments, something new began to blossom. Tell me about your world, Ethan requested one evening as they shared a meal in their common living area. His shoulder was remarkably well healed, thanks to Lyra's intervention, leaving only a faint, silvery scar. Lyra looked up from her synthetic blood supplement. What specifically do you wish to know? Anything. What does it look like? What aspects of it do you truly miss? She considered his question with a rare seriousness. Kth Prime orbits a red giant star. Our days are much longer than Earth's, and the light is profoundly softer. Everything is steeped in crimson and deep amber hues. Our cities are constructed vertically, spiraling towards the heavens. A wistful quality entered her voice. The capital city features towers that have stood for 10,000 years, their crystalline facades shimmering and changing color with the passage of the seasons. It sounds extraordinarily beautiful, Ethan commented. It once was. Her expression darkened slightly. Now many entire districts stand abandoned. Grand halls that once resonated with millions of voices are now silent. We are a dying people clinging to the memory of faded glory. Ethan reached across the table, hesitated for a moment, and then gently placed his hand over hers. It was the first time he had deliberately initiated non-medical, physical contact. I am truly sorry, Lyra. Lyra gazed at their interlocked hands. In a different lifetime, perhaps I might have had a family, she confessed softly. Even as a soldier, I allowed myself to dream of it sometimes, before the medical report exposed the truth. The truth? Ethan prompted gently. That my reproductive system never properly matured, she explained. The physician stated it was as though my body had halted its development before full maturity, even though every other system functioned normally. She slowly withdrew her hand. That is why I was chosen for this project. What is the value of a warrior who cannot engage in combat? What is the purpose of a female who cannot sustain life? The sheer resignation in her voice ignited a powerful protective spark in Ethan's chest. Utility is not the only measure of worth, he argued passionately. You are not merely a soldier or a potential mother. You are Lyra. And that, in itself, possesses intrinsic value. She looked at him with genuine perplexity. Your perspective is profoundly human. Maybe humanity has managed to get a few things right, he suggested with a faint smile. Later that evening, while meticulously reviewing data in the lab, Ethan noticed a sequence in Lyra's genetic profile that he had somehow missed before, a distinctive pattern that did not align with standard Kth biology. Lyra, he called out, his voice buzzing with sudden excitement. Look at this. She joined him at the console, her shoulder brushing his as she leaned closer to view the screen. This sequence here, Ethan pointed, it's not characteristic Kth DNA. It's almost as if As if what? She urged when he hesitated. As if someone deliberately altered your reproductive coding, he finished slowly. This isn't a natural mutation or a developmental failure. Someone engineered this infertility. Lyra stared blankly at the display, her expression unreadable. Are you proposing that I was intentionally sterilized beyond the standing Kth modifications? I am stating that someone went to considerable lengths to ensure your reproductive system would be absolutely non-functional, Ethan confirmed. The critical question is why? The implications of this revelation hung heavy and unsettling between them. If Lyra had been specifically targeted for additional sterilization, it meant someone desired absolute certainty she could never bear offspring. Over the subsequent weeks, they plunged deeper into this enigma, working together with growing synchronicity. Their official experiments, blood compatibility hormone treatments, genetic recombination attempts, were meticulously documented and reported to their respective governments. But their secret research was focused solely on deciphering the unique alterations in Lyra's DNA. These markers, Ethan observed one night, highlighting his findings, they bear a striking resemblance to ancient Kth royal bloodlines. Could you possibly possess noble ancestry? Lyra frowned sharply. Impossible. My lineage is exhaustively recorded. I am from a common house, though one respected for military service. Records can be fabricated, Ethan suggested. What if you carry genes someone was desperate to suppress? The possibility that Lyra was far more significant than she had been led to believe added an exhilarating layer to their already complex relationship. As they worked shoulder to shoulder, the formal professional boundaries began to blur. Their hands would occasionally touch as they reached for the same tool. Their eyes would meet over successful test readings. These small moments of intense connection accumulated like stellar bodies forming a galaxy. One evening, following particularly encouraging results from a new method combining Kth and human genetic material in a neutral medium, Ethan realized he was standing closer to Lyra than protocol allowed. The lab lights had dimmed for the nightly cycle, bathing her features in a soft, dark glow. We are achieving breakthrough progress, he murmured, his voice low. Yes, she agreed, making no move to pull away. Their secret research had shown that the clinical detachment and use of force favored by official protocols created biological resistance. Yet, when the genetic material was willingly combined with an emotional connection, the cellular barriers began to react differently. They desire a weapon, Ethan stated. Or a simple tool at best. They fail to grasp that life doesn't operate that way. And how exactly does life operate, Dr. Hale? Lyra asked, her intense violet eyes studying his face. Instead of answering with words, Ethan closed the final distance between them. The kiss was gentle, tentative, an experiment of a completely different nature. For a moment, Lyra remained perfectly still, and Ethan began to withdraw, an apology already forming on his lips. But then her hands rose, cupping his face, and she returned the kiss with unexpected, fierce intensity. When they finally separated, both breathing rapidly, Ethan spoke first. "The monitoring systems are disabled for routine maintenance," he whispered. "For the next 6 hours, there is no one watching but us." What followed was a discovery far more profound than any laboratory finding. The revelation that connection between two distinct species was not merely plausible, but transformative. Their union was both tender and fierce, building a bridge across biological divides that science alone could never have constructed. Afterward, resting in the soft light of his quarters, Lyra traced the silvery scar on Ethan's shoulder. "This should be impossible," she whispered. "Kth and humans are not biologically compatible." "Perhaps compatibility isn't solely about biology," Ethan suggested, pulling her closer. "Maybe it's about choice, about genuinely wanting to connect instead of being forced to." Lyra rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "If the Empire ever discovers this." "They won't," Ethan promised. "This is ours, not theirs." But secrets within high-security research facilities rarely remain secret for long, and the universe was about to unleash a surprise neither human science nor Kth tradition had remotely prepared them for. 6 weeks later, the impossible occurred. Ethan stared at the medical scanner, running the test for the third time to unequivocally confirm what the results clearly indicated. Beside him, Lyra sat perfectly immobile, her face a mask of profound shock. "This cannot be correct," she whispered. But the evidence was undeniable. Despite millennia of Kth infertility, despite Lyra's supposedly dead womb, despite every scientific prediction to the contrary, she was pregnant. "How?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "I was certified zero fertile. My reproductive system was deemed permanently non-functional." Ethan reviewed the data once more, his mind furiously racing to comprehend the miracle on the screen. "Remember those anomalous genetic markers we identified? I believe someone wanted to ensure you specifically couldn't reproduce." "Which means I always had the potential," Lyra finished, her hand moving automatically to cover her lower abdomen. "But why? Why target me so specifically?" Before they could delve deeper, the lab door slid open. Dr. Eleanor Way, the human medical supervisor, entered with her daily checklist. Her eyes immediately fixed on the active scanner display. "What is this?" she asked, moving closer to inspect the readings. Her eyes widened, transitioning rapidly from confusion to shock to clinical, burning excitement. "My God," she breathed. "It worked. The program actually worked." She instantly reached for her communicator. "I must alert the Oversight Committee immediately." "Wait," Ethan said desperately. "We don't have enough data yet. We need more time to comprehend what is happening." But Dr. Way was already connecting to command. "General Kth, Dr. Way reporting. Sir, I have extraordinary news. Subject Lyra Vera is showing confirmed positive pregnancy indicators." "Yes, sir." "Verified on multiple scans. The program has succeeded." Everything moved at a dizzying pace after that. Within hours, the research facility was swarming with high-ranking officials from both species. Lyra was swiftly separated from Ethan, rushed to a specialized medical unit for exhaustive evaluation. Ethan, meanwhile, was isolated and rigorously interrogated about his methodologies. "This is a truly remarkable accomplishment, Dr. Hale," General Kth stated during one such session. "The first recorded cross-species conception in history. You will be cemented in the scientific annals." "Where is Lyra?" Ethan demanded, completely ignoring the praise. "I need to see her." "Ambassador Varick and his team are conducting their own crucial assessments," Kth replied dismissively. "The Kth have a vital stake in understanding how you managed to achieve what their scientists could not for millennia." "We achieved it together," Ethan corrected sharply. "And this isn't about mere scientific achievement. It is about a woman and her child." Kth's expression hardened into a severe mask. "Let us be absolutely clear, Doctor. This pregnancy represents a potential resolution to an interspecies crisis that has threatened war for decades. It is fundamentally about politics, security, and the future of two civilizations." Your personal emotional attachment to the subject, while noted, is irrelevant. Her name is Lyra, Ethan spat through clenched teeth. And she is not a subject. 5 agonizing days passed before Ethan was finally allowed to visit Lyra. When they escorted him to her medical suite, he barely recognized the room. It had been transformed into a hybrid lab and hospital, with complex monitoring equipment surrounding the bed where Lyra sat, pale and visibly drained. "Ethan," she said when she saw him, palpable relief flooding her voice. He rushed to her side, immediately taking her hand despite the disapproving stares from the Kth medical team. "Are you all right? Have they hurt you?" "I am intact," she replied cautiously, glancing at the observers. "They have been performing tests, many tests." Ethan noted distinct bruising on her arms where samples had been repeatedly taken. Anger flared fiercely in his chest. "This stops now," he announced loudly, turning to face the assembled officials. "You will cease treating her like a lab specimen." Ambassador Varick stepped forward, his tall figure commanding the crowded space. "Dr. Hale, you must grasp the immense significance of this event. This child holds the future of our species." "This child," Ethan countered, his voice firm, "is Lyra's child and mine, not the property of either government." Varick's expression remained glacial, but his voice was dangerously cool. "Incorrect. Under the terms of the treaty, any viable offspring resulting from the compatibility program belongs equally to both signatory parties for comprehensive scientific study. You cannot own a person." Ethan argued vehemently. "A hybrid is not legally classified as a person under current statutes," General Kth interjected. "Its official status is a matter to be resolved by the Joint Committee." "It's my child," Lyra spoke up for the first time, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable force that instantly silenced the room. "You speak of my child as if it were merely an object. The embryo is approximately 7 weeks developed," one of the Kth doctors stated clinically. "Preliminary scans indicate a unique fusion of human and Kth cellular structures in novel configurations. Full genetic sequencing is now underway to determine viability and potential applications." "Applications?" Ethan repeated incredulously. "You are talking about a baby, not a technology." "A baby with potentially revolutionary genetic properties," Kth countered smoothly. "Properties that could instantly resolve the Kth fertility crisis, or perhaps create advanced human-Kth hybrids combining the respective strengths of both species." The implications hung in the air like a toxic chemical cloud. This child, their child, was already being viewed as a template, a prototype to be replicated and brutally exploited. Later, during a brief, monitored moment of privacy, Lyra revealed the full extent of what she had learned. "The Kth physicians believe my pregnancy resulted from a highly specific combination of factors that they cannot easily reproduce," she whispered. "My unique genetic anomalies combined with emotional factors they don't fully comprehend." "Love," Ethan supplied simply. "They don't understand that force is ineffective. Connection is what works." "They plan to study the child exhaustively after birth," Lyra continued, her hand instinctively protecting her still flat abdomen. "And they hope to use genetic material from both of us to attempt creating more hybrids in laboratory conditions." Ethan's jaw tightened in cold fury. "And if that fails," Lyra finished, her voice breaking slightly, "they will extract reproductive cells from our child once it reaches maturity, creating a new breeding line controlled by both governments." The sheer horror of this impending future settled over them. Their miracle child would become a perpetual research subject, a genetic resource to be harvested and manipulated. "We cannot let that happen," Ethan declared, taking her hands firmly in his. "We have to get out of here." Lyra's violet eyes widened. "Escape? The security is designed to keep others out, not us in." "Exactly," Ethan agreed. "They need us cooperative for the research to continue. We have a leverage they don't yet realize. They can't study us if we aren't here. But where would we go? Both our worlds would relentlessly hunt us down." "Not all humans agree with the government's stance," Ethan said thoughtfully. "And I suspect not all Kth support the Empire's methods either. We just need to find the right allies." That night, lying awake in his separate quarters, Ethan meticulously began formulating a plan. It would demand perfect timing, inside assistance, and no small amount of luck. But facing the alternative, a lifetime of their child being treated as mere property, made even the slimmest chance worth seizing. The next morning, during his mandated research session, Ethan casually requested additional reference materials from the xenobiology archives from his assistant, Mei Jiang. May was young, idealistic, and had privately expressed concerns about the program's ethics. The files on Kth reproductive histology might help us understand the anomalies we're seeing, he explained. Those are in the restricted section, May pointed out. I'll require special clearance. Use my access code, Ethan said, writing it down along with a string of seemingly random numbers that were actually the coded message he desperately needed delivered. May glanced at the paper, then back at Ethan, a flicker of comprehension in her eyes. She gave a slight nod and left to retrieve the files. Over the next 2 weeks, utilizing May as his unwitting courier, Ethan established contact with Dr. Thorne, an aging Kth physician who had been sidelined for questioning the program's ethics. Through carefully coded requests for research materials, Ethan outlined his concerns and their desperate need for assistance. Dr. Thorne's reply arrived hidden within a routine medical supply delivery, a small vial labeled for Lyra's daily supplements, but containing a microtransmitter with encoded coordinates and instructions. The escape plan took shape in hushed whispers and secret messages. Dr. Thorne had connections to an underground network of Kth who prioritized individual rights over imperial mandates. They could arrange transport to neutral territory, entirely beyond the reach of both governments. However, Ethan and Lyra would have to reach the extraction point completely on their own. The opportunity arose 3 weeks later. As Lyra's pregnancy reached the end of the first trimester, a routine transfer was scheduled to move her to a more specialized facility. The transport shuttle would pass near the Deimos outpost, close enough to the extraction coordinates for them to make their move. On the morning of the transfer, Ethan was permitted a supervised visit to brief Lyra on the journey's medical protocols. As the guard waited outside, Ethan embraced her, whispering the plan into her ear while pretending to check her vital signs. "Today," he murmured. "When the shuttle reaches the Deimos corridor, be ready." She gave no outward sign, but he felt her subtle nod against his shoulder. Hours later, as the medical transport cruised through the Mars-Deimos corridor, Ethan initiated their plan. Using his medical override, he triggered a life support system alarm, not severe enough to cause danger, but sufficient to create instant confusion and divert the crew's attention. As the crew rushed to investigate, Ethan and Lyra slipped into the shuttle's emergency evacuation pod. These pods were engineered for rapid deployment in case of catastrophic failure. "Perfect for our needs," Ethan noted, his finger hovering over the launch control. Lyra took a deep, steadying breath, then nodded. "For our child," she said. Ethan hit the launch sequence. The pod detached with a violent jerk, sending them tumbling away from the transport. Alarms would be blaring on the shuttle, but by the time a pursuit could be organized, the tiny pod would be lost against the background of Deimos's heavily cratered surface. They powered down all non-essential systems to minimize their electronic signature and waited, drifting silently in the shadow of the small Martian moon. After what felt like an eternity, a flicker of light blinked 3 times in a specific pattern. The signal from Dr. Thorne's contacts. Their rescue arrived in the form of a battered mining vessel. Its identification transponders claimed it was a routine or processor. The ship's magnetic grapples locked onto their pod, drawing it into a concealed cargo bay. When the airlock cycled open, they faced a grizzled human captain with a cybernetic eye and a Kth navigator whose pale blue skin was marred with the distinctive scarring of radiation exposure. "Dr. Hale, Lady Vera," the captain said gruffly. "I'm Captain Reeves. This is Toril. Welcome aboard the Nomad's Fortune. We have about 30 minutes before patrol drones sweep this sector, so let's skip the pleasantries and get moving." As the mining ship accelerated away from Mars orbit, using a complex series of pre-programmed jumps to confound any pursuit, Ethan and Lyra were shown to a small cabin that would be their home for the journey. "Where are we headed?" Ethan asked. "It's better you don't know the specifics yet," Captain Reeves replied. "Let's just say there are places beyond the reach of both your governments, where people still believe in self-determination." That night, safe for the moment in their tiny cabin, Lyra finally allowed herself to release the rigid emotional control she had maintained throughout the escape. She wept silently, her face pressed against Ethan's chest. "I never thought I would." She struggled for the words. To carry life was impossible enough. To have hope for that life's future seemed beyond all imagining. Ethan held her tightly, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her abdomen where their impossible child grew. "We'll find a way," he promised. "Somewhere we can be truly free." But freedom would prove far more elusive than either of them anticipated. The child they carried was far too valuable for either government to simply relinquish. The journey to the edge of charted space took nearly 3 weeks. The nomad's fortune followed obscure shipping lanes, regularly changed identification transponders, and twice used specialized equipment to mask their engine signature when patrol vessels approached. During this time, Lyra's pregnancy progressed with unexpected complications. Her body, never designed to nurture life, was struggling to adapt to the unique hybrid child growing within. The ship's rudimentary medical facilities were wholly insufficient for her unique needs. Her system is rejecting certain aspects of the pregnancy, Ethan confirmed, his face etched with worry. We need a facility and quickly. Toril, the Kth navigator who possessed some medical knowledge, examined Lyra and explained his findings to Ethan. Kth females naturally lack several crucial hormones necessary for sustaining human-type fetal development. What can we possibly do? Ethan asked, worry lines deepening around his eyes as he watched Lyra sleep restlessly in their small cabin. Toril hesitated. There is an ancient Kth practice, blood bonding. When noble houses wished to strengthen weak offspring, they would form a close biological connection with the bearer. We would attempt this between our species. I'll do anything, Ethan said instantly. Just tell me how. The procedure was both ancient and deeply intimate. Each day, Ethan would voluntarily draw and give his blood, which Lyra would consume. This created a continuous biological exchange that essentially helped her body recognize and support the half-human life developing within her. In a reciprocal process, her system produced specialized antibodies that shielded Ethan from the toxic side effects of prolonged exposure to Kth biochemistry. Their two bodies became a closed system of mutual support, mirroring on a physical level the profound emotional bond they had already forged. It was an exhausting regimen for both, but gradually Lyra stabilized, and the fetal scans showed significant improvement in development. Your child is truly remarkable, Toril observed after one examination. Neither fully human nor fully Kth, but a genuine integration of both genetic structures. This has never before been documented. Captain Reeves was more concerned with the harsh reality of their situation. The bounty on you two has escalated to astronomical figures, he informed them one evening over a meager meal in the ship's galley. Every mercenary and bounty hunter across 3 sectors is actively searching for a pregnant Kth female and a human male. How much further is the safe haven? Ethan asked. Reeves exchanged a grim look with Toril. That's the core issue. Our original destination has been compromised. We received intelligence that a joint human Kth strike force raided the outpost last week. They are systematically eliminating all potential sanctuary zones. Then where can we go? Lyra asked, her hand moving instinctively to protect her visibly growing belly. We have only one remaining option, Reeves said gravely. The boundary worlds beyond the official jurisdiction of either government. But they are lawless, extremely dangerous territories, far from ideal for your condition. Lawless is infinitely preferable to captivity, Ethan declared immediately. How quickly can we reach them? 4 days at maximum burn, Reeves calculated. But we must make a stop for fuel first. There is an independent mining colony near here that still operates autonomously. We have reliable contacts there who can assist. The necessary stopover proved to be their downfall. As the Nomad's fortune docked at the asteroid colony's commercial port, they were completely unaware that concealed facial recognition scanners had already identified them and transmitted critical alerts to waiting agents. They were midway through the refueling process when the trap brutally sprung closed. Armed troops, a startling mix of human and Kth forces in an unprecedented joint operation, swiftly surrounded the ship. Captain Reeves barely managed to trigger the emergency protocols, sealing Ethan and Lyra into a hidden compartment beneath the cargo hold before the boarding parties breached the main airlock. Be absolutely silent, Reeves had warned them before locking the compartment. This section is shielded against standard scans. If they don't locate you immediately, they might assume you departed the ship earlier. For 6 terrifying hours, they huddled in complete darkness. They heard heavy boots tramping directly overhead and the persistent humming of scanning devices pressed against the bulkheads. They heard Captain Reeves's muffled, angry protests and Toril's insistent claim that their passengers had disembarked at a previous stop. Then, a sharp silence, followed by the distinctive metallic sound of restraints being applied and prisoners being marched away. They're gone, Ethan eventually whispered, activating the dim emergency light inside their hiding place. But they've taken the captain and Toril. Lyra looked pale in the weak illumination, her pregnancy now clearly visible beneath her ship suit. They sacrificed themselves for us, she said softly, the weight of the realization heavy in her voice. We will find a way to help them once we are safe, Ethan promised, though both knew the prospect was highly unlikely. Using the emergency protocols Reeves had taught them, they waited until the station's maintenance cycle began and security shifts rotated. Then they quietly slipped out of the ship through a rarely used service hatch, emerging into a narrow mechanical access tunnel running beneath the colony's main concourse. "We need to find a way to transport off this station," Ethan murmured as they navigated the dimly lit passages. "Preferably something small and fast." "The registry office would contain ship listings," Lyra suggested, her military training instantly kicking in, "but it will be heavily monitored." They moved cautiously through the colony's underbelly, expertly evading security checkpoints and surveillance nodes. Years of military training had made Lyra an adept hand at evasion tactics, while Ethan's knowledge of standard security protocols helped them map out safe routes. At a public data terminal in a low-traffic maintenance sector, Ethan accessed the colony's ship registry. He pointed to a specific listing, a scout vessel registered to an independent surveyor, noted for its minimal crew requirement and long-range capabilities. "How do we acquire it?" Lyra asked practically. Ethan grimaced. "We steal it." The scout ship was conveniently docked in a secondary bay used primarily for private vessels. Security was lighter here, focused more on preventing the theft of valuable cargo than the ships themselves. Using access codes gleaned from the public terminal, they managed to enter the docking bay entirely undetected. The scout vessel, sleek, utilitarian and clearly well-maintained, sat in berth 7. Its external nameplate identified it as the Pathfinder. "Can you fly this?" Ethan asked as they approached the ship's entry hatch. Lyra nodded. Kth military training includes piloting various vessel types. The principles are universal. Bypassing the security lock took precious minutes, each second amplifying the risk of discovery. Finally, the hatch slid open with a hydraulic hiss and they slipped inside. The ship's systems activated under Lyra's experienced touch. Within moments, they had disengaged docking clamps and requested departure clearance using the owner's identification codes. "Pathfinder, you are cleared for departure from Bay 7, came the automated response. "Please confirm destination for traffic control purposes." "Jupiter Mining Consortium," Lyra replied smoothly. "Routine survey mission acknowledged, Pathfinder. Safe travels." As they accelerated away from the asteroid base, Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of hope. Perhaps they had escaped undetected after all. Perhaps they could truly reach the boundary worlds and find sanctuary. That hope was brutally extinguished 30 minutes later when the ship's proximity alarm blared. 3 military vessels, 2 human, 1 Kth, had appeared on long-range scanners, moving swiftly to intercept their position. They must have been waiting in the outer asteroid belt, Ethan realized. "We flew right into their net." Lyra's hands moved swiftly over the controls, pushing the scout ship to its maximum acceleration. "This vessel is fast but minimally armed," she assessed. "We might outrun them but not indefinitely." For the next 12 hours, they engaged in a desperate cat-and-mouse chase through the asteroid belt, utilizing the dense field of space rocks for cover and executing a complex series of maneuvers to shake the pursuit. Lyra's piloting skills proved exceptional, but the relentless strain of sustained high-G maneuvers took a massive toll on her pregnant body. "I can't maintain this," she finally admitted, her face gray with exhaustion. "The baby? I feel something is wrong." Ethan took over the controls, his piloting less skilled, but sufficient to maintain their heading while he ran an immediate medical scan. The results confirmed his deepest fears. The stress was causing premature contractions. At barely 6 months gestation, the baby would not survive an early birth. "We must find somewhere to land," he decided urgently. "Somewhere to hide until you stabilize." The ship's charts indicated a small research outpost on one of the outer asteroids, abandoned years ago according to the registry, but potentially with functional life support systems still intact. As they approached the asteroid, their pursuers closed the distance. Energy weapons fire splashed violently against their aft shields, depleting power reserves at an alarming rate. "We won't make it," Lyra said grimly, watching the tactical display. "Yes, we will," Ethan countered, executing a final desperate maneuver. He diverted all remaining shield power to the engines and aimed the Pathfinder directly for a narrow fissure in the asteroid surface, a natural hangar barely wide enough for their ship. The scout ship scraped through the opening with a violent screech of tearing metal, losing communication arrays and sensor equipment in the process, but the main hull remained intact. They crashed more than landed in the ancient hangar bay, the ship's systems failing around them as emergency protocols engaged. In the sudden silence after the impact, Ethan turned to Lyra. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly, her hands protectively cradling her abdomen. "For now. But they will follow us in." "Not immediately," Ethan said, checking the external cameras that still functioned. "That entry is far too narrow for their military vessels. They'll be forced to send in ground teams." They gathered what few supplies they could carry and evacuated the damaged ship, making their way deeper into the abandoned research facility. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they moved through the corridors, responding to motion after years of dormancy. "This place," Lyra observed, looking around at the dusty but intact laboratory equipment. "It's a biotech facility." Ethan examined the faded insignia on one wall. United Science Cooperative, pre-war era. They were researching terraforming technologies before the funding dried up. The facility's central laboratory offered both shelter and potential resources. Ancient but functional medical equipment lined the walls, and sealed supply cabinets promised materials that might help stabilize Lyra's condition. As Ethan worked feverishly to set up a makeshift medical station, Lyra monitored the facility's perimeter sensors. "They've landed," she reported grimly. 3 shuttles. Approximately 20 personnel are entering the complex. Ethan looked up from the medical scanner he'd activated. "How long until they reach us?" 20 minutes, perhaps less. They both knew there would be no further running. Lyra's condition was rapidly deteriorating, and the hybrid child in her womb was showing signs of distress that demanded immediate intervention. Even if she had been well enough to flee, they had nowhere left to go. "I need to stabilize the baby," Ethan said, preparing a treatment protocol using the ancient but serviceable equipment. Lyra took his hand, squeezing it firmly. "Whatever happens after this, Ethan, I do not regret any of this. We have already achieved what both our worlds believed impossible." As he administered the treatment that would hopefully stabilize their child, they could hear the distinct sounds of the search teams moving through the facility, systematic, thorough, and utterly inexorable. "I have an idea," Ethan said suddenly, looking around at the laboratory equipment. These old terraforming labs operated with broadcast biological catalysts, compounds designed to trigger widespread genetic response. "If I can adapt the delivery system?" He worked feverishly, combining his extensive knowledge of xenogenetics with the available archaic technology. Lyra helped where she could, but mostly focused on monitoring both her own condition and the speed of the approaching search teams. "What exactly are you synthesizing?" she asked as he combined their own biological materials into a compound. "Evidence," Ethan replied grimly. "Proof that what happened between us can't be replicated through force or clinical procedures. That life can't be manufactured or controlled the way they desire." The first search team reached the laboratory level just as Ethan finished his preparations. They could hear commands being issued, doors being checked systematically. "They're here," Lyra whispered. Her contractions had stabilized, but she remained dangerously weak, in no condition to fight or flee. Ethan moved to her side, taking her hand. "Whatever happens next, remember this. What we created wasn't about politics or species or power. It was about connection, about choosing each other despite everything designed to keep us apart." The laboratory doors slid open. Armed soldiers, human and Kth, stood side by side in an unprecedented joint operation, their weapons instantly trained on the fugitives. Behind them came the architects of their pursuit, General Kth of the Human Alliance and Ambassador Vera of the Kth Empire. Their expressions displayed triumph tinged with scientific curiosity as they regarded the pregnant Kth female and her human companion. "Dr. Hale, Lady Vera," General Kth addressed them formally. "You've led us on quite a chase. But now it is time to return you both to proper facilities where your condition can be appropriately monitored and studied. For the good of both our species," Ambassador Vera added smoothly. "The child you carry represents the hope for the Kth race. Surely you grasp the importance of allowing our scientists full access to this miraculous development." Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself directly between the officials and Lyra. "The child is not a development, not a specimen, not a miracle of science. It's our baby, created through connection, not coercion." Romantic notions aside, Kth dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The fact remains that you've achieved what our best scientists could not. The method must be studied and replicated." "That's just it," Ethan said, his hand moving subtly toward the device he'd prepared. "It can't be replicated, not the way you want." Without warning, he activated the broadcast system. A fine, invisible mist dispersed throughout the laboratory, carrying the biological compound he'd synthesized. A molecular-level record of the unique, emotional and physical circumstances that had allowed Lyra's impossible pregnancy to occur. "What have you done?" Varric demanded, as soldiers immediately moved forward to restrain Ethan. "Shared the truth," Ethan replied calmly, allowing them to secure his hands. "That compound contains a detailed molecular mapping of the exact biological and emotional conditions that made this pregnancy possible. Your scientists can analyze it for centuries, but they will all reach the same conclusion: force doesn't work. Control doesn't work. Only genuine connection between willing participants has any chance of success." Kth scoffed, his disbelief evident. "You expect us to believe that? What love made this possible? That's not science, Dr. Hale." "Isn't it?" Ethan challenged. "Every test you ran on us failed. Every forced attempt at cross-species reproduction failed. Only when Lyra and I chose each other, not as specimens but as people, did life take hold. That's not a coincidence. That is data." As if responding directly to his words, Lyra suddenly gasped, doubling over in pain. "Ethan," she cried, panic in her voice. "The baby? Something's happening." The soldiers restraining Ethan hesitated, looking to their commanders for instructions. In that precious moment of uncertainty, Ethan broke free and rushed to Lyra's side, medical training instantly overriding everything else. "She's in labor," he announced, helping Lyra to a reclined position on the laboratory's examination table. "The baby is coming now." "Impossible," one of the Kth medical officers protested. "The gestation period is insufficient. The hybrid cannot be viable yet." But the evidence before them contradicted all scientific expectations. Lyra's body had violently accelerated the pregnancy in response to the extreme stress and danger, a unique biological survival mechanism neither human nor Kth, but exclusive to their hybrid child. What followed was a birth unlike any witnessed before by either species. As Ethan supported Lyra through the intense process, the assembled soldiers and officials found themselves transformed from captors into awestruck witnesses of something profoundly unprecedented. When the child finally emerged, small but perfectly formed, with pale blue skin bearing a subtle human pinkness and eyes that shifted between deep violet and warm brown, a powerful silence fell over the laboratory. This was no monster, no biological weapon, no mere scientific curiosity to be dissected and studied. This was simply a baby, crying with the same plaintive need as any newborn throughout the galaxy. As Ethan placed the child gently in Lyra's arms, something remarkable occurred. The infant's skin began to emit a subtle bioluminescence, a soft, pulsing glow that spread first to Lyra, and then to Ethan as he touched his child for the first time. "Cellular regeneration," one of the Kth scientists whispered in awe, scanning the phenomenon with a handheld device. "The child is producing the exact enzyme sequence the Kth lost millennia ago, the one that enables natural reproduction." The implications rippled through the room like a shockwave. This child, this impossible hybrid, born of connection rather than coercion, carried within its very cells the key to saving the Kth from extinction. Not as a specimen to be harvested, but as living proof that life finds a way when allowed to flourish naturally. General Kth and Ambassador Varric exchanged long, meaningful looks. The carefully constructed political narrative they had planned was shattered by the simple, beautiful reality before them. "By the terms of our agreement," Varric began uncertainly. "It may need to be reconsidered," Kth finished, watching the family before them, human, Kth, and the future of both, united in a moment of pure, undeniable connection. In the days that followed, as Lyra recovered and their child, a daughter they named Nova, grew stronger, the political landscape shifted dramatically. The compound Ethan had released into the air proved conclusively that forced breeding programs would never succeed. Only genuine biological and emotional compatibility could create viable hybrid offspring. Furthermore, Nova's unique physiology offered hope for the Kth that did not require exploitation. Her cells naturally produced the enzymes their ancestors had engineered out of existence. Enzymes that, with proper medical application, could potentially restore fertility to the entire species. A new accord was swiftly negotiated. Ethan, Lyra, and Nova would not be research subjects, but honored citizens with diplomatic status in both realms. They would work with medical teams voluntarily, helping develop treatments for Kth infertility based on Nova's unique biology. 3 months later, as their ship approached a neutral colony where they would establish their new home, Ethan stood by the viewport with Nova cradled gently against his chest. Lyra joined them, her arms slipping around his waist. "She is already growing so quickly," Lyra observed, watching their daughter's luminescent skin pulse gently with her heartbeat. "She will be extraordinary," Ethan said softly. "Not because she is a hybrid or because she carries the salvation of a species in her DNA, but because she is ours, because she exists despite everything that said she couldn't." Lyra rested her head against his shoulder, her violet eyes reflecting the stars beyond the viewport. "They gave a sterile alien vampire woman to a man," she mused, recalling how their story began. Ethan smiled, completing the thought as he gazed down at their miracle child. But she returned, carrying life. As their ship continued toward its destination, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, a family that had defied biology, politics, and destiny itself. Their story would be told for generations across both civilizations, not as a scientific case study or political triumph, but as proof that connection transcends difference and life finds a way.